He was the most feared man in Seoul. Criminals crossed the street to avoid his shadow. Politicians answered his calls before the second ring. For 15 years, Kwon Tae-jin built an empire on silence, fear, and blood, and he never once flinched. But tonight, hidden behind a hospital curtain, this untouchable man is trembling. Because the people destroying his wife, the woman he swore to protect with his life, are not his enemies. They are his own mother, his own sister, his own blood. And he heard every single word. Stay with me until the end. And drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The rain came down hard that night, the kind of rain that didn't care who you were or what you owned. It slapped the windows of Seoul's most expensive hospital like it had a grudge, streaking the glass in long, crooked lines that looked almost like scars. Inside, the hallways were quiet, in that particular way hospitals get after midnight. Not peaceful, just exhausted. Machines beeped behind closed doors. Nurses moved on soft shoes. The air smelled like antiseptic and something else underneath it, something Kwon Tae-jin had always privately thought of as the smell of people running out of time. He was bleeding. Not badly. The cut above his left collarbone had stopped seeping through the folded cloth he pressed against it 40 minutes ago, somewhere on the expressway. Somewhere between the burning wreckage of two vehicles that had tried to ambush his convoy and the moment his driver had gotten the call. His wife. Banquet. Collapsed. Emergency room. Those 4 words, delivered in a flat voice over the car's speakers, had done something to Tae-jin that 20 minutes of gunfire had not. His hands had gone cold. His throat had closed. And the man who had just survived a coordinated assassination attempt had told his driver, very quietly, to drive faster. Now he stood outside the door to room 412, his tailored black coat buttoned to the throat to hide the makeshift bandage, his face carrying the particular blankness he had spent years perfecting. A face that gave nothing away. A face that men had learned, the hard way, not to misread as weakness. 2 of his security team flanked him at a distance, professional enough to know when to stop existing. He did not go through the main door. There was a side entrance, a narrow utility corridor that connected to a private access panel installed at his expense when he first leased this floor for family use 2 years ago. He knew every room on this level. He had paid for that knowledge. He punched the access code with his thumb, stepped through, and let the door click shut behind him in the dark. Nia was asleep. He stood just inside the threshold and looked at her. The room held only the blue-white glow of monitors and a single dim lamp near the headboard. She was lying on her back, both arms at her sides, an oxygen cannula resting just below her nose. Her chest moved, up, down, up, down. He watched it for a long moment, just to be sure the rhythm was real. Her face, even slack in unconsciousness, even pale against white hospital linen, was still the most recognizable thing in his world. The only face that had never looked at him like he was something to be afraid of or something to be used. He had not told her about the ambush tonight. He would not. There were 100 things Tae-jin had never told Nia, and he had always believed that was protection. That was what he had told himself for 3 years, in the language of men who confuse silence with shelter. He was moving toward the chair beside her bed when he heard the voices in the hallway. His mother's voice. Mi-suk. Precise, low, accustomed to being obeyed without being asked twice. And beneath it, softer but still sharp at the edges, his sister. Seo-ra. The 2 of them together, at this hour. He didn't think. He simply stepped to the left, behind the wide privacy curtain that ran on a ceiling track beside the bed, and pressed himself against the wall as the door opened. He told himself later that he only did it to avoid alarming Nia, that he didn't want Mi-suk to see the coat, the blood hidden underneath it, and cause a scene in a hospital room, that it was purely practical. He told himself that, and he almost believed it. But the truth he had no language for yet, standing there in the shadow, was that something in the tone of his mother's voice had made him go still the way prey goes still. Not out of fear, out of instinct, out of the bone-deep knowledge developed over a lifetime, that Mi-suk's voice at that particular register meant something dangerous was happening. The door closed. He heard his mother's heels on the tile, a chair scraping back, the small, deliberate sounds of a woman who had never been in a hurry because she had never needed to be. Still sleeping, Mi-suk's voice was almost thoughtful. Good. I was afraid the doctor would have woken her by now. She had another episode just before I arrived. Siora's voice was quieter, positioned closer to the window by the sound of it. The nurse said her heart rhythm was irregular again. I know what the nurse said. A pause. I spoke to her before I came up. Oma. Something in Siora's voice flickered, not quite reluctance, but something adjacent to it. Something that a less careful listener might have called conscience trying to clear its throat. Don't. Misuk's syllable landed like a period at the end of a sentence that hadn't been spoken yet. We are not here to feel sorry for her. We are here to assess the situation. Behind the curtain, Taejin stopped breathing. He did not mean to. His body simply made the decision before his mind caught up. His lungs locked. His hand, still pressing the folded cloth against his collarbone, went perfectly still. She's going to be fine, Siora said, and it wasn't reassurance. It was something more like disappointment thinly covered. The cardiologist said the valve issue is serious but operable. She'll need surgery within the next few weeks. I know that too. Misuk's heels moved, a light sound. She had sat down in the chair beside the bed. The chair Taejin had been about to pull toward himself. The question is what Taejin decides to do about it. What do you mean? He's distracted enough already. Between the port negotiations and what happened tonight, she stopped, then, more carefully. He doesn't need to be managing a sick wife at the same time. She is his wife. She is a problem. The words came out with no heat in them at all, which was somehow worse than anger. She was always a problem, Siora. I said so from the beginning. I said it the moment he brought her home. And I said it at the wedding, and I have been proven correct every month since. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when one person in a room agrees with something they do not want to say out loud. She's never done anything wrong, Siora said finally, and her voice was careful, measured. The voice of a woman walking across ice, testing each step. She exists, Misuk said. In our family, in our name. That is enough. Taejin had spent 38 years inside his mother's world. He had watched her operate, in boardrooms disguised as dining rooms, in family councils that functioned like courts, in the quiet, devastating negotiations she conducted over dinner tables while everyone else thought they were simply eating. He had believed for most of his life that she was protecting something, that the coldness was armor, that the cruelty was strategy. He had given her those explanations the same way a man gives a fire credit for keeping him warm, before he notices how much of the house it has already consumed. He had not understood, until this moment, what she was capable of when he wasn't in the room. The messages, Misuk said. She's been trying to reach him about the doctor's appointment for 3 weeks. I made sure those didn't arrive. The floor seemed to tilt. You intercepted. I managed the situation. The way I always manage the situation. The way someone has to, because your brother has been too busy holding this organization together to notice that his wife has been quietly falling apart. Another pause. A sound like fingers adjusting the strap of a handbag. Or letting her fall apart, depending on how you look at it. That's not... Siora's voice cracked slightly. Alma, she needed to see a doctor. If we'd known about the heart condition sooner, we did know. The 2 words fell into the room like stones into still water. Siora made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She mentioned chest pain at the Chuseok gathering. Misuk's voice was flat, even. The voice of someone recounting a grocery list. She told me she'd been feeling breathless for weeks. I told her it was stress. I told her she was making too much of it. I told her the way she was behaving, looking for attention, interrupting family evenings with her complaints, was why Taejin's patience was wearing thin. A small pause. She believed me. That's the thing about her. She always believed me, because she kept trying to make me like her. Behind the curtain, something cracked inside Kwon Taejin's chest that had nothing to do with the wound beneath his coat. He had seen men broken before. He had, on certain occasions, been the reason for it. He understood violence, the clean, terrible logic of it. But there was no logic here. There was only his mother's voice, unhurried, sitting beside the bed of the woman she had quietly been dismantling for months, while Nia slept 2 feet away with a tube feeding oxygen into lungs that had been struggling for weeks because no one had let her get help in time. She asked Taejin at the dinner in March. Siora's voice was barely above a whisper now. She asked him if she could see a specialist. He said he'd arrange it. He forgot. The word was almost gentle. He's a busy man. and we made sure he stayed busy. The calls I redirected, the appointments I canceled, the things I told him, over time, about how she'd become distant, unstable. Misuk's voice didn't change register. He believed me too. That's the thing about men in his position. They want to believe their families are manageable. It's easier. Taejin had fought men twice his size. He had walked through situations that would have stopped lesser people cold. He had made decisions that carried the weight of dozens of lives, and made them without shaking. But standing in the shadow of that curtain with his mother's voice filling the room, he felt something he had no name for. Something older and heavier than rage. Something that lived in the part of a person that forms before they learn what strength is supposed to look like. It felt like the ground disappearing. There's also the document, Seora's voice. Cautious again, careful. Which one? The foundation. Taejin had her listed as primary trustee. If she's declared medically unfit, then the control reverts to the family council. Misuk finished the sentence the way she finished most sentences, smoothly, without hesitation, as if the ending had always been the only option. I spoke to the lawyer last week. The language is there. It's already in the original filing. A long silence. Then Misuk stood. He could tell by the shift in her voice, the slight change in acoustics. Wake her if she stirs. I want her to understand when she's lucid that this family's resources are not unlimited, and that her recovery will need to be handled quietly. No press, no extended stays. The hospital will receive a donation. The staff will be discreet, heels moving toward the door. And Seora, yes, whatever she says to you tonight, whatever she asks for, you tell me first, before Taejin, before anyone. A pause at the door. That's not a suggestion. The door opened, closed. Seora remained in the room for another moment. He could hear her breathing, uneven, slightly fast. He heard her move to the window. He heard, and he was not certain of this, not entirely, a sound that might have been her pressing her palm flat against the glass. Then she left too. Taejin stood behind the curtain for a long time after the room went quiet again. The monitors beeped. The rain hit the window. Nia's chest rose and fell. He thought about the March dinner. He had a specific memory of it now. Nia in a pale green dress, leaning toward him at the table, saying something he hadn't quite caught because he was reading a message on his phone. He remembered looking up, seeing her face, and thinking she looked tired. He remembered his mother, on his other side, touching his arm and asking him about the port contract. He remembered turning. He remembered not going back to whatever Nia had been trying to say. He thought about the unanswered calls. He had 3 numbers on his phone that Nia used. A habit she'd developed because calls from her primary number sometimes went to voicemail when he was in meetings. He had assumed she kept trying because she was anxious. He had assumed the anxiety was something she needed to manage. He had not asked who had told him that. He had simply believed it, the way you believe weather forecasts. Not because you verified the data, but because someone in authority delivered it with confidence. He thought about all the dinners he had been told she chose not to attend, all the family events she had allegedly found excuses to skip. He thought about the expression she'd worn the last time he'd asked, careful, controlled, the expression of someone who has stopped expecting to be heard and has started simply surviving. He had thought it was distance. His mother had told him it was distance. It was not distance. It was a woman trying to hold herself together quietly so that the man she loved wouldn't have to choose. Taejin stepped out from behind the curtain. He moved to the side of the bed. He sat down in the chair, his mother's chair, still warm, and he looked at Nia's face for a long time without touching her. There was a cut on his hand he hadn't noticed getting. The wound at his collarbone had started bleeding again, slowly, the cloth gone stiff and dark beneath his coat. He didn't move to address either of them. Then Nia's eyes opened, not with alarm. Slowly, the way sleep releases people it's been holding tightly. Her gaze found the ceiling, then the lamp, then his face. She blinked once, twice. He watched her understand where she was, and then he watched her understand where he was, and something moved across her expression, something complicated and unguarded that she wouldn't have let him see if she'd had another second to compose herself. "You're here," she said. Her voice was rough from the oxygen tube. "Yes." She closed her eyes again for a moment. When she opened them, she was more controlled. "How long?" He didn't answer right away. "Taejin." Her voice had changed, not louder, but harder at the edges. "How long have you been in this room?" He looked at her, at the woman who had hidden a dangerous heart condition and months of calculated cruelty to protect him from a choice, and he said, "Long enough." Nia went very still. The monitors continued their patient beeping. Rain slid down the glass. And Quan Tae-jin, the most feared man in Seoul, sat in his mother's chair, with blood seeping quietly through his coat, watching his wife's face as she understood, in the silence between them, exactly what he meant. She did not cry. She did not look relieved. She looked, instead, the way people look, when a weight they have been carrying alone for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down, suddenly finds itself lifted, not with joy, but with the hollow, stunned exhaustion of someone realizing how long they'd been about to break. "How much did you hear?" she finally asked. "Everything," he said. The word landed between them like a door closing, or perhaps like a door for the first time, opening. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. The rain did not let up. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang 3 times and stopped. Taejin's hand rested on the metal rail of her bed, close to hers but not touching it yet, as if he understood, with a new and terrible clarity, that the distance between them now was not his to simply cross, that it would have to be traveled carefully, one honest inch at a time. When Nia finally turned her head to look at him directly, there was something in her eyes that he had not seen before, or perhaps had not allowed himself to see. Not anger, not accusation. Something quieter and more final than both. "There are things I need to tell you," she said. "Things I've been keeping because I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought it was the right call. I thought I was protecting you. Nia, let me finish." Her voice was still rough, but it had steadied. "I need you to hear me this time. Not through them. Not filtered through whatever version of me they've been selling you." She held his gaze and did not look away. "I need you to actually hear me." "I'm here," he said. And this time, it meant something different. She exhaled slowly, the oxygen tube shifting slightly with the movement, and she began to tell him, not everything, not yet, not in one night, but enough. Enough to confirm what he had heard. Enough to show him the shape of it, the months of small exclusions, the redirected messages, the dinners she'd been asked not to attend because her presence made certain relatives uncomfortable, the chest pain she'd mentioned to Mi-suk one autumn evening, and the look on his mother's face when she'd said it, the look she'd described as boredom, but which Nia now understood had been something colder than that. Outside the window, headlights from the street below moved slowly through the rain-soaked dark. Seoul did not sleep, even on nights like this. Somewhere out in the city, Taejin's enemies were reorganizing after the failed ambush. Somewhere, phone calls were being made, positions were being adjusted, and the chess pieces of an underworld that had outlasted dynasties were being quietly slid across a board that only certain men could see. And somewhere in that same city, Mi-suk Kwon was going home in a black car, smoothing her coat across her lap, and believing, with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never yet been wrong about the things she controlled, that tonight had gone exactly as planned. She did not know her son had been in that room. She did not know that the curtain she'd spoken behind had already come down. She did not know that by morning, everything she had spent a lifetime building inside her family was going to begin to fall. Outside in the corridor, a figure in a gray suit paused at the end of the hall, glanced toward room 412, and lifted a phone to his ear. His call lasted 11 seconds. When it ended, he walked quickly toward the stairwell, and behind him, the hospital lights flickered once, just once, in the rain-soaked dark. The figure in the gray suit was named Cho Byung-il, and he had worked for the Kwan organization for 11 years. He was not a soldier. He was not a captain. He existed in that particular category of man that large criminal enterprises require and rarely acknowledge. The kind of man who knew which doors to leave unlocked, which phones to keep charged, and which silences to maintain. He was, in the language of men like Taejin, infrastructure, invisible, necessary. And for the past 4 months, he had also been quietly receiving a second salary from a man named Park Do-hwan. He did not think of himself as a traitor. He thought of himself as a man who had correctly identified which direction the wind was turning. He was wrong about that. But he wouldn't know it yet. In room 412, Taejin had not moved from the chair. Nia had stopped talking 20 minutes ago, not because she ran out of things to say, but because her body had made the decision for her. Her eyes had closed mid-sentence, the way exhaustion takes people when the thing they've been holding finally loosens. Her breathing steadied. The monitor's rhythm held. Tae-jin watched her sleep and did not leave the chair. His phone had vibrated 11 times since he'd entered the room. He had not looked at it once. At 2:47 in the morning, the door opened and his head of security, a blunt-faced man named Han Dong-soo, stepped into the room with the careful movements of someone trying to carry bad news without spilling it. He was one of 3 men Tae-jin trusted without conditions. He looked at the chair. He looked at Nia. He looked at the dark stain visible now, at the collar of Tae-jin's coat, and his jaw tightened. "You need a doctor," he said quietly. "Close the door." Dong-soo closed it. He moved to the far side of the room, away from the bed, and lowered his voice to something that was barely more than shape. 4 of ours didn't make it out of the overpass. 2 are in surgery downstairs. Do-hwan's men. We've confirmed 6 of his. 2 we haven't identified yet. The vehicles were stolen from a construction company in Incheon. They had our route. He paused. They had it before we did. Tae-jin looked at him. Someone gave it to them, Dong-soo said. This wasn't opportunistic. They knew which car you were in, they knew the timing, they knew the secondary exit. That's not intelligence they picked up on the street. Another pause. Shorter. It's internal. The words settled in the room without drama. Tae-jin did not react the way men in films react to betrayal. There was no explosion, no fist through a wall. His face simply did what it always did when he was processing something that required the full weight of his attention. It went still. Completely. Almost unnervingly still. The way water goes still before it freezes. Who's been running the convoy logistics? Byung-il. Since when? He took over route management from Sergeant Park 3 months ago. Park requested a transfer to the Busan office. We approved it. Dong-soo's voice stayed flat, but his eyes weren't. I should have flagged the timing. I didn't. Where's Byung-il now? A pause. We're not sure. Tae-jin stood up from the chair. The movement was slow and deliberate, the movement of a man managing pain without advertising it, and Dong-soo watched it with the expression of someone who knows better than to offer help that won't be accepted. Tae-jin buttoned the top of his coat. He looked at Nia for a moment, still sleeping, chest still moving in its steady rhythm. And then he looked at Dong-soo with the kind of focus that made capable men want to take a small step backward. Find him, Tae-jin said. Don't touch him. Don't speak to him. Find him and watch every door he goes near. He moved toward the utility corridor. I'll be back before she wakes. Boss? Dong-soo's voice stopped him. Your mother called the hospital administrator an hour ago, requested a full briefing on Mrs. Kwan's condition and a list of the attending staff. Tae-jin's hand rested on the door panel. He did not turn around. And the administrator complied. She's a Kwan. They always comply. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Tae-jin punched the access code and walked through. He had the wound seen to in a service room 2 floors down by a doctor who owed him a debt that predated the hospital itself. 8 stitches. Local anesthetic that wore off before the thread was done. The doctor did not ask questions. He had learned over many years that questions directed at Kwan Tae-jin either received no answer or received one you spent a long time wishing you hadn't heard. Tae-jin sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent light and let the man work and thought about the convoy route and thought about Byung-il and thought, beneath all of it, about his mother's voice saying the words she had said. I told her it was stress. I told her she was making too much of it. He kept returning to those sentences the way a tongue keeps returning to a cracked tooth. Not because the contact was pleasant, but because the crack was there and the body couldn't stop confirming it. He had a memory, specific and sharp now, of a conversation with Mi-suk 6 weeks ago. They had been in her receiving room, the one with the low furniture and the landscape scrolls she collected. And she had told him, over green tea he hadn't touched, that she was worried about Naya, that she seemed withdrawn, that she had tried to reach out to her daughter-in-law and been met with coldness, that Nia had missed 2 family dinners and declined an invitation to the charity committee meeting. He remembered thinking, while his mother spoke, that he should talk to Nia. He remembered meaning to. He remembered the call from his logistics director that came in as he was leaving Mi-suk's house, and the meeting that followed And the way the intention to talk to Nia had slid sideways into the following week, and then the week after that, until it became one of those things he was always about to address. His mother had known exactly how busy he was. She had helped make him that busy. The doctor tied the last stitch and stepped back. "You should rest." "Thank you," Taejin said, which was not agreement. He returned to room 412 before 4 in the morning. He sat back down in the same chair. He watched Nia breathe. He did not sleep. At 7:15, the attending cardiologist knocked and entered, a careful-looking man in his mid-50s named Dr. Yoon, who had the specific manner of someone accustomed to delivering information to powerful families, and had developed over decades a precise calibration for how much honesty a given situation could bear. He stopped when he saw Taejin, adjusted his clipboard, recalibrated. "Mr. Kwan, I didn't expect you until—" "Tell me about her heart," Dr. Yoon told him. Mitral valve prolapse, complicated by a regurgitation that had progressed over what appeared to be at least 8 to 10 months without intervention. The collapse the previous night had been a significant cardiac event, not a heart attack, but a warning that the body was approaching a threshold. Surgery was necessary, not optional, not something that could be managed with medication and monitoring indefinitely. Without the procedure, the risk of a major cardiac event increased substantially over the next 6 months. With the procedure performed by a skilled team, her long-term prognosis was genuinely good. Taejin listened to all of this without interrupting. When Dr. Yoon finished, he asked one question. If she had seen a specialist 8 months ago, when symptoms began, what would the treatment have looked like? Dr. Yoon hesitated. And the hesitation was the answer. Simpler, he said finally. Likely non-surgical or a less complex procedure. The condition was manageable at an earlier stage. He paused. Is there a reason she delayed care? Taejin looked at him with those flat, still eyes. Schedule the surgery, he said. Best team you have, whatever she needs. Dr. Yoon nodded, made a note, and left quickly, with the relieved energy of a man who had expected the conversation to be worse. Nia woke up at 8. She found Taejin still in the chair. He had removed the coat. It was folded over the arm of the chair, the inside facing up, the dark stain hidden. He was in his shirt sleeves. She could see the edge of the bandaging at his collar and said nothing about it, which told him she had noticed it immediately. You stayed, she said. I said I would. She looked at the ceiling, then at the window, where morning had arrived gray and wet, the rain lighter now but still present. Your mother will come back this morning. I know. I don't want to see her. You won't have to. Nia turned her head to look at him then, and there was something careful in her expression. Not suspicion exactly, but the particular guardedness of a person who has been promised things before. Taejin, what does that mean? It means she won't come into this room again without my permission. He met her eyes, and she doesn't have it. Nia was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped softly. It's not that simple. She's your mother. This is her organization as much as... It isn't. The words came out flat and certain. It never was. She managed my father's legacy until I was old enough to take it. The title was always mine. He paused. I allowed a great deal of latitude because I believed she deserved it. Another pause. Shorter. I was mistaken. You can't just... Nia stopped herself, exhaled. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, more tired. I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to go to war with your family for me. I never wanted that. That's why I didn't tell you. She looked at her hands on the blanket. I know what it costs. I know what it does to men in your position when the inside starts to fracture. Do you know what it cost you? His voice didn't rise, didn't shift, but something in it did. To stay quiet, while your heart was failing, while she told you it was stress. He leaned forward slightly in the chair. Do you know what I'm sitting here thinking about? She didn't answer. The March dinner, he said. You tried to tell me something. Nia's expression changed. Something moved across it, old and tired and still somehow sharp, the way old wounds are, the way things hurt more once the numbness finally goes. I was going to ask about the specialist, she said quietly. I'd been getting the chest pain for 2 months by then. I'd already mentioned it to Misuk. She stopped. She told me to bring it up with you directly. She said she didn't want to bother you with small things. Her voice was level, but her hands, flat on the blanket, had pressed down slightly. So I tried, and I turned away. You got a call. I turned away, he said again. Not with theatrics, just the flat, undeniable thing of it. The room was quiet for a moment. I'm not giving you absolution for that, Naya said, and it wasn't cruel. It was just honest, the kind of honesty that comes from a woman who has been past the point of softening things. That one you have to carry yourself. I know. But I'm also not going to tell you everything was your fault, because it wasn't. They worked very hard to make sure you didn't see what was happening. She looked at him directly. I need you to understand the difference between being deceived and being negligent. You were both. You need to be clear on which parts were which. He held her gaze and said nothing, which was, she had learned over 3 years of marriage, one of the ways Kwantai Jin expressed that he was actually listening. The door opened. Misuk entered at 9:47, and she entered the way she always entered rooms, with complete ownership of the space, her coat immaculate, her expression the particular version of maternal concern that she wore for hospital visits and funerals. She had a woman from her staff 2 steps behind her. She did not look at the chair beside the bed immediately. She looked at Naya first, and her expression did something complicated and fast that was over before it fully arrived. Then she looked at the chair. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Tae-jin watched his mother's face run through something it almost never ran through. He watched it process a variable it had not accounted for. He watched the control reassert itself, smooth and practiced, but not before he saw, clearly, unmistakably, the flicker underneath. Tae-jin. Her voice was warm, perfectly calibrated. I didn't know you were here. When did you arrive? He stood up from the chair. He did not move toward her. Sit down, Oma, he said. Quietly. Pleasantly, almost. Something in his tone made the woman from her staff take a small step back. Misuk did not sit. She stayed where she was, 3 feet inside the door, and looked at him with the full weight of a woman who had spent 40 years being the most formidable person in every room she entered. You need rest. You look terrible. Was there trouble last night, I heard? Close the door, he said to the staff woman. The woman looked at Misuk. Misuk gave the smallest possible nod. The door closed. They were alone. The 3 of them, in the hospital room, with the monitors and the rain and the morning light coming in flat and gray through the window. You should go home and sleep, Misuk said, redirecting smoothly. I'll sit with her. We can speak this afternoon. I know about the messages, Tae-jin said. The room changed temperature. Misuk looked at him for a moment. Then at Nia. Then back at him. What messages? The ones you intercepted. The appointment reminders. The calls from Dr. Yoon's office that went to a number you control instead of mine. He watched her face. He had spent his life learning to read faces in rooms where the wrong read could be fatal. I know about the Chuseok dinner. What she told you. What you told her. Tae-jin. Her voice had shifted. Still warm, but the warmth had a different quality now. Careful, precise. Like heat applied surgically. You've been up all night. You've been injured, clearly. You're not... Don't. One word. It stopped her the way a closed door stops wind. I was in this room last night, before you arrived. I was behind the curtain. He let that land. He watched it land. I heard everything you said. Misuk's face did not crumble. He had not expected it to. She was not that kind of woman. What it did was something more instructive. It reorganized. The warmth left it entirely, and what remained underneath was cooler and more honest and in some ways easier to deal with, because it was real. Then you heard me trying to manage a very difficult situation, she said, the way I have always managed difficult situations. For this family. For you. You knew she was sick. I knew she complained of... You knew. His voice did not rise. It never rose. But it acquired a quality that men in his organization had learned, the hard way, to treat with absolute seriousness. 8 months. You knew she was symptomatic, and you told her it was attention-seeking. You intercepted her communications to me. You lied to me about her behavior. And last night, when her heart gave out at a dinner table, he stopped, breathed. Was that the outcome you were managing toward? Misuk's chin lifted. I was protecting this family's interests. You were protecting your position. It is the same thing. No. He shook his head once, slowly. It is not the same thing, and the fact that you cannot tell the difference is... He stopped again. The sentence didn't need finishing. He could see in Nia's face, from the corner of his vision, that she was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something between fear of what might happen next and the terrible, fragile relief of a woman hearing her own experience confirmed out loud by the one person whose confirmation mattered. Masuk looked at Nia then, directly. The look was not apologetic. It was not guilty. It was assessing, the way she looked at every problem, measuring, calculating, looking for the angle that still worked. "You've made him feel this is your suffering alone," she said to Nia. Her voice was almost pleasant. "But you came into a family with obligations you have never understood. You have demands this family cannot—" "Get out," Nia said. The words were quiet, completely quiet. But they were the most unambiguous thing in the room, and Mi Suk Kwan, for the first time Tae-jin could remember in his life, did not immediately have an answer. "I'm not asking," Nia said. "I'm telling you, get out of this room." The silence stretched. Outside, a cart rattled down the corridor. The monitor beeped once, twice. Mi-suk looked at her son. Tae-jin said nothing. He did not need to. What he was not doing spoke loudly enough. Mi-suk left. The staff woman followed. The door closed with a sound that was almost nothing, barely a click, and yet it felt, in the room, like something enormous. Nia pressed her head back against the pillow and closed her eyes. Her chest rose and fell in a long, slow breath that cost her something. When she opened her eyes, she looked at the ceiling and said, very quietly, "She's not done." "No," Tae-jin agreed. "She's going to find another angle. She always does." "Yes." "You need to be prepared for what that looks like." Nia turned her head to look at him. "Because it won't look like what just happened. It never looks like what just happened. It always looks like something reasonable, something protective." She held his gaze. "She's very good at making cruelty look like love." "I know what she is," he said. "You know it right now, in this room." Her voice was steady but not gentle. "The question is whether you'll still know it when she's in front of you in a different room, telling you a different story, and I'm not there." He had no immediate answer for that. It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest response. And the honest response required him to sit with the uncomfortable weight of 3 years of being managed by someone he'd trusted absolutely. "I'm going to need time to understand the full shape of it," he said. "What she's done. How long, all of it." He looked at Nia. "I'm going to need you to tell me things that are going to be hard to hear. And I'm going to need to know," she said carefully, "that telling you doesn't just make me useful. That I'm not swapping one kind of silence for another." He understood what she meant. He understood it completely. "That's fair," he said. It was not the declaration of a man who had everything figured out. It was the sentence of a man who was starting from a real place. And Nia, who had lived long enough inside false certainty to know the difference, received it without softening it into something more than it was. Dongsu's message came through at 11:22. 3 words on an encrypted line. Tae-jin read it again, and felt something shift in his chest that was not the stitched wound. Byung-il found. Not alone. He typed back 1 word. "Where?" The response came in under a minute, and it contained a name alongside the location. Not just a location inside the city, a name that explained the convoy route, the timing, the specific vehicle identification, the secondary exit, all of it. A name that placed a second player inside the architecture of last night's ambush, a player who had access not to Tae-jin's logistics, but to something closer, something that should have been entirely unreachable. The name was not Park Do-hwan's. It was his mother's personal secretary. Tae-jin stood up from the chair again. He crossed to the window. He stood there for a moment looking out at Seoul in the rain, at the gray rooftops and the long, wet streets, and the city that had belonged to him in one way or another since he was 23 years old. He thought about what Dongsu's 3 words meant if you followed them to their logical end. He thought about the convoy route and the ambush and the specific car they had targeted, and the fact that only 4 people had known he would be traveling from the east side that night. His mother had given his location to Do-hwan, not his wife's transfer route. Not a business negotiation. His. She had given the route of the car her son was traveling in to a man who wanted him dead, or at minimum incapacitated in order to seize the ports. Which meant one of 2 things. Either she had not known what Do-hwan intended to do with that information, which was an ignorance he could not give her credit for, or she had known exactly what Do-hwan intended, and had made the calculation that the outcome was acceptable, that a city was worth a son. He stood at the window for a long time, long enough that Nia's voice came quietly from the bed behind him. Tae-jin. He turned. She was watching him. She had not heard the message. She did not know what he had just read. But she had learned, across 3 years of marriage to a man who controlled everything he showed and showed very little, to read the quality of a silence. And this one was the kind that preceded something irrevocable. "What happened?" she said. He looked at her. He thought about how to answer. He thought about all the things he had withheld over all the years in the name of protection. He thought about what she had said to him this morning. "I need you to actually hear me." And he thought about what it meant to be heard, genuinely, by someone who had spent years talking into silence. He crossed the room. He sat down. He put his phone on the bedside table between them and let her read the message herself. Nia read it again. Her expression did not break. It hardened in the specific way of someone absorbing a thing they have long suspected but hoped, quietly and without admitting it, was not actually true. When she looked up, her eyes were steady. "She gave them your route," she said. "Yes." "She knew what they would do with it." He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Nia set the phone down carefully. She folded her hands on the blanket. She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet she looked like what she was. A woman recovering from a near-fatal cardiac event, sitting in a hospital bed, looking at the complete and final collapse of the version of this family she had spent 3 years trying to belong to. "So what do you do now?" she said. And it was at that precise moment, before he could answer, before he could even fully understand what the answer was, that Dong-soo knocked once on the door and entered with the specific controlled urgency of a man carrying news that has moved from bad to critical, and said, in a voice kept deliberately low and even, "She made another call, 40 minutes ago, from her car." He looked at Tae-jin. She gave them the transfer route. The room went absolutely still. "Nia's transfer route," Tae-jin said. Not a question. "To the cardiac facility. Tomorrow night." Dong-soo's jaw was tight. "Do-hwan's people already have it." Tae-jin stood up from the chair for the 3rd time in that room, and this time he did not sit back down, and the look on his face was one that Dong-soo had seen exactly twice before in 11 years. And both times, by the following morning, the landscape of the city's underworld had permanently and irreversibly changed. Nia looked at him from the bed. "Go," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Go," she said again, and there was something in it, not permission, not command, but the voice of a woman who had finally, after months of being kept in the dark, decided she was done being protected from the truth of the life she was living inside. "But when it's over, whatever over looks like, I need you to come back and tell me everything, not what you decide I can handle. Everything." He held her gaze for one long moment. Then Kwon Tae-jin walked out of room 412 for the first time since the night before, into the corridor with its humming lights and its smell of antiseptic and its ordinary machinery of people trying to survive. And he pulled out his phone, and he called Dong-soo second, and he said 4 words in a voice that was completely calm and completely without mercy. "Lock down the hospital." Outside, in the wet Seoul morning, a black van turned off the main road and began moving slowly toward the hospital's service entrance. Its plates freshly switched, its occupants counting the hours until the following night's transfer, and not one of them yet knowing that the man they had underestimated, the man whose mother had handed them what they thought was his vulnerability, had already begun to move. The hospital lockdown took 11 minutes to execute, which was 8 minutes longer than Tae-jin would have preferred and 3 minutes faster than Dong-soo had promised. By the time the service entrance was sealed and the rooftop access points were covered, the black van had already pulled into the loading bay and its occupants had already gotten out, which meant that somewhere between the phone call and the perimeter, there had been a second leak. Tae-jin stood in the hospital's security monitoring room, a windowless space 2 floors below the lobby that smelled like old coffee and recycled air, and watched 6 camera feeds simultaneously while Dong-soo stood behind him and did not speak, because he understood that what was happening on those screens required complete silence to process correctly. 3 men from the van, moving through the service corridor with the particular economy of people who had walked the route before. Not running, not hesitating at junctions, moving with the specific confidence of men who had been given a map. "They've been inside before," Tae-jin said. or someone walked them through it remotely. Dong-Su leaned forward. Camera 4, left pocket. The man in the center of the three was holding something at his side. Small, rectangular, the size of a phone, but held differently. A floor plan. Printed. Which meant it had been transmitted, which meant it was already on paper before tonight, which meant the preparation for this had started before Mi-suk's call 40 minutes ago. Before, not after. Tae-jin looked at the timestamp on the camera feed. Then he looked at Dong-Su. How long has Do-hwan been planning this? Based on what I'm seeing right now, Dong-Su straightened. Longer than we thought. This isn't reactive. They didn't pivot after the ambush failed last night. They already had this in motion. Which means the ambush wasn't the primary plan. No. Dong-Su's voice was careful, precise. The ambush was a distraction, something to pull your attention outward while they moved inward. He paused. Toward her. The word landed in the monitoring room with the weight of something Tae-jin had been circling without quite reaching since the moment Dong-Su had told him about the transfer route. He had been thinking about it as two threats, the external attack last night and the threat to Nia's transfer tomorrow. He had been thinking about them as sequential. He had been wrong. They were the same threat unfolding on two tracks simultaneously, and the center of both of them was not his empire, his ports, his organization, or his power. It was the woman in room 412. Tae-jin's face did not change. His breathing did not change. But something behind his eyes went through a shift that Dong-Su, who had known him for 15 years, recognized and took a quiet half-step back from. Get my 4 best men to her floor, now. Not the elevator, the stairs. And I want someone inside the room. He looked at camera 4 again. Not in the hall, inside. Dong-Su was already moving. Tae-jin watched the 3 men on the monitors reach a junction in the service corridor and stop. The one in front checked the floor plan, turn left. The corridor they had turned into led to the laundry facility, which connected to a staff elevator, which accessed every floor in the building on a separate key system from the patient elevators. It was the kind of route you found by studying building schematics, not by walking the building twice and making notes. This was engineering-level knowledge of the hospital's infrastructure. He picked up the desk phone, called the administrator's direct line. The men in your service corridor, have your staff clear out of the laundry facility and the adjacent access points. Do it quietly. If anyone in a uniform approaches those men before I say so, people will get hurt. He hung up before the administrator could respond. Then he thought about who had access to hospital schematics. Who could have obtained them, legally, through proper channels, without raising flags? Who had spoken to the hospital administrator the previous night and requested a full briefing? Who had, over the course of 2 years, donated enough money to this facility that her name was on a plaque in the cardiac wing? He picked up the phone again and called a number he rarely used, a man named Shin, who worked at a level of the organization so far below the surface that most of Tae-jin's own captains didn't know he existed. I need everything Mi-suk has touched in the last 6 months, he said. Financial, communications, physical movements, every meeting, every call, every transfer. He paused. And I need to know when she first made contact with Park Do-hwan. Shin's response was 3 seconds of silence, followed by, How far back do you want me to go? As far as it goes, Tae-jin said. However far that is. He hung up and returned to the monitors. The 3 men had reached the staff elevator. One of them pressed the call button. They waited. The elevator opened. They got in. Tae-jin watched the elevator indicator on the board begin its climb. It stopped on the 4th floor. He was already moving. The stairwell was faster than the elevator if you took it the way Tae-jin took it. Not running, exactly, but moving with the controlled urgency of a man who has spent his adult life navigating situations where speed and noise were a trade-off, and silence was almost always worth more. He reached the 4th floor door before the elevator opened. He pressed himself to the wall beside the door's small wired glass window and watched the corridor. 2 of his men were already positioned, one near the nurse's station, one halfway down the hall. They had positioned correctly, angles covering both approaches. Dong-Su had done his job. But Tae-jin could see from his vantage point something that the 2 men in the corridor could not see from theirs. The door to room 412 was open, not wide. An inch, maybe 2. The kind of open that happens when someone doesn't fully close a door, or the kind of open that happens when someone is already inside and left it slightly ajar behind them. The two men in the corridor were watching the elevator doors. They were not watching the room. The elevator opened and the three men stepped out, and in the exact moment that Tae-jin's men in the corridor moved to intercept them and the shouting started, and the controlled situation became briefly and violently less controlled, Tae-jin pushed through the stairwell door and went directly to room 412 and pushed it open and found Seora standing beside Nia's bed. His sister, Seora. She was standing with her back to the door, one hand on the bed rail, the other holding a phone at her side, the screen lit. She turned when the door opened, and her face did what faces do when the thing they were not expecting walks through the door. It went through 3 expressions in under a second, too fast to manage, too honest to hide. Surprise first. Then something that might have been relief, which he did not understand yet. Then something that was unmistakably and devastatingly guilt. Nia was sitting up in the bed, oxygen cannula still in place, both hands flat on the blanket. Her face was the opposite of Seora's, entirely controlled, a surface with nothing readable on it, which was the face she wore when she was most afraid. Tae-jin. Seora's voice was barely above a whisper. He looked at the phone in her hand. Who are you calling? No one. She stopped. The lie didn't finish itself. She looked at the phone as if she'd forgotten she was holding it, and then she lowered it to her side in a movement that was almost mechanical, the movement of someone whose body was operating slightly behind their mind. Who are you calling, Seora? I came to check on her. The words came out too fast. I wanted to see if she was... After Alma was removed from the room, he stepped inside, let the door close behind him. You waited 3 hours, and then you came alone. He looked at Nia. Did she say anything to you? Nia looked at Seora for a moment before answering. She asked me when the transfer was scheduled, she said. Her voice was completely flat. She said she wanted to coordinate with the family so someone could be at the receiving facility. The room went very quiet. Seora's eyes closed, a single slow close like a curtain coming down. When they opened, they were wet, which was the first real thing Tae-jin had seen from her in this entire situation. The first thing that wasn't managed or calculated or filtered through whatever his mother had built inside her over the course of a lifetime. I didn't tell her, she said. I didn't answer. I heard your men in the hall, and I didn't... Her voice cracked at the hinge. I swear to you, I didn't tell her. Give me the phone. She held it out. He took it. He looked at the call history. The last outgoing call was to Mi-suk's number, placed 4 minutes ago. Duration, 22 seconds. Long enough to give a time. Long enough to confirm a detail. He looked at Seora, and she looked back at him. And he could see, in her face, the exact moment she understood that he was reading the call log, and the exact moment she understood there was no version of the next 60 seconds that ended without her being what she actually was. 22 seconds, he said. I hung up. Her voice was a wreck. I called her and then I couldn't. I hung up. After 22 seconds. I didn't tell her anything. I said I was at the hospital and she started asking and She pressed her free hand to her mouth for a moment. Tae-jin, I am trying to tell you that I stopped. That I am trying to stop. That I don't... She looked at Nia then, and it was the kind of look that crosses the specific terrain between people where words are insufficient and everyone in the room knows it. I don't want this. I have not wanted this for a very long time. The sentence didn't finish. You just couldn't stop, Nia said. Not with cruelty, just with the precision of someone naming a thing accurately. Seora made a sound that wasn't a word. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, the chair that had held Tae-jin, and before him Mi-suk, and she put her face in her hands, and the phone in her lap lit up with an incoming call from their mother, and none of them moved to answer it. Tae-jin looked at the phone ringing in his sister's lap, and thought about 22 seconds, and thought about floor plans, and thought about a van in a loading bay, and thought about the specific arithmetic of how much damage could be accomplished in the gap between what Seora had said and what Mi-suk had heard. He picked up the phone and answered it. Well, Mi-suk's voice on the other end was the smoothest it had been all day. The controlled warmth was back, the warmth she applied like a professional, in exactly the right quantities. You've been busy. Tell your men to leave the building, Tae-jin said, A pause, brief, considered. I don't know what men you're referring to. The three in the laundry corridor, or the two from the van that your people parked in the loading bay before I sealed the entrance. He kept his voice even. Tell them to walk out the way they came in, unarmed, now. Another pause, longer this time. He could hear, in it, the sound of his mother recalibrating, the specific silence of a chess player reassessing a board that has changed shape faster than expected. You're making a significant mistake, she said finally. You're upset. You've been awake for over 20 hours. You've been injured. You are not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I have in 3 years. He looked at Nia as he said it. She held his gaze without moving. Call them off. I won't ask again. Taejin. Her voice shifted, not softer, but differently calibrated. The mother voice, the one she'd been using since he was 8 years old, the one that carried the specific frequency of a woman who had always known best, always seen further, always carried the weight that other people couldn't manage. Everything I have ever done has been for this family. Everything. You want to stand in that hospital room and judge me for protecting what your father built? Did you give Do-hwan my convoy route? The silence this time was of a different quality entirely. Did you give him the car I was in? The timing? The secondary exit? His voice was still even, completely even. The evenness of a man who has gone past the point where volume means anything. Did you make the calculation that if something happened to me, you could manage the transition to a structure that kept you at the center? The silence stretched to 4 seconds. 5. That is not what happened, Mi-suk said. Then tell me what happened. I shared information with Do-hwan in the context of a negotiation that was intended to stabilize the situation, not a negotiation. He said the word back to her with nothing attached to it. No inflection, no anger, just the word returned. You were negotiating with the man who tried to kill me. I was preventing a war that you were too emotional to prevent yourself. Her voice had hardened now, the warmth gone entirely, the thing underneath it fully visible for the first time. Do-hwan has reach that goes beyond your ports and your contacts and your influence. He has political connections that could dismantle everything we've built within 6 months. I was managing that risk, the way I have always managed risk, before you were old enough to understand what risk was. And Nia, the word dropped into the call like a stone. What about her, Mi-suk said. Was she part of the negotiation? Silence. Was she a concession? His jaw was tight now. The first physical sign that the evenness was costing him something. Was she something you offered Do-hwan to get what you needed? A useful pressure point, something to hold over me. She was leverage, Mi-suk said. And then, 1 beat too late. That is not... Say that again. Taejin. Say exactly what you just said. The silence on the line was the silence of a woman who had, for the first time in this conversation, made an error she could not immediately correct. Not a tactical error, something deeper, something that sounded, even to Mi-suk herself, like what it was. Seora had lifted her face from her hands. She was staring at the phone in her brother's grip with an expression that was past guilt now and into something rawer. The expression of someone hearing, out loud, the full shape of the thing they had been a part of, without naming it that clearly, even to themselves. Nia was looking at the window. Her profile was still and clean and gave nothing away, but her hands on the blanket had tightened until the knuckles were pale against her skin. Get your men out of this building, Taejin said into the phone, and then go home. And do not contact Nia. Do not contact anyone on my staff. Do not contact Do-hwan. He paused. We will speak when I decide we speak. He ended the call. He stood in the room for a moment with his sister's phone in his hand. Then he set it on the bed rail and looked at Dong-soo, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the call, silently, in the way Dong-soo always appeared when things had reached a critical threshold. He held up 2 fingers. Dong-soo nodded and withdrew. 2 minutes later, Dong-soo came back. They're moving. All of them. All 5. Out the service entrance. He paused. Mi-suk must have called it off. She did. Taejin looked at the phone. She's recalculating. What does that mean for tonight? It means tonight is more dangerous than it was an hour ago. He turned. She gave Do Hwan leverage, and now she's pulling it back, which means Do Hwan is going to act on his own timeline before she can renegotiate. He's not going to wait for her permission. He picked up his own phone, called Shin. How fast can you get me the communication records? 4 hours for the surface layer, Shin said. Encrypted channels, maybe 12. 4 hours. He looked at the window. Outside, the rain was finally easing, the sky lightening from black to a deep, exhausted gray. Start with anything that connects her to Do Hwan directly. Dates, amounts, the content, if you can get it. He hung up. Seora had not moved from the chair. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor, and she had the look of someone at the end of a long process of self-deception. The look of someone who had run out of the energy it takes to not see something clearly. Seora! Tae-jin's voice was not warm, but it was not what it would have been an hour ago either. It occupied a middle ground that was something like the space before a verdict. How long have you known? She looked up. Her eyes were dry now, which was almost worse. Known what specifically? Any of it. All of it. The messages you helped intercept, the things you said to Nia at family events. He kept his eyes on her. The conversation you had with Do Hwan's people 3 months ago at the hotel in Gangnam. The color left Seora's face. Tae-jin watched it go. Yes, he said. I know about that. He didn't. He had constructed the sentence from the infrastructure of what he did know. From Shin's preliminary work. From the pattern of the last few months. From the specific look on Seora's face when he'd named a meeting he was actually guessing at. But the guess had been right, because her face had told him so. And Kwon Tae-jin had built an empire partly on his ability to read the difference between a flinch and a blink. It was one meeting, she said. Her voice was barely functional. Alma arranged it. She said it was a standard diplomatic contact. That Do Hwan wanted to discuss a business arrangement. I was just... She stopped. I was there because she needed a witness she could trust. What was discussed? Nia. The word came out like something she'd been holding at arm's length for 3 months and had finally dropped. The foundation, the medical situation, She pressed her lips together. Do Hwan asked questions about her health, her status in the family, her relationship with you. Alma answered most of them. Seora looked at him with eyes that held something between terror and the particular relief of someone who has reached a point from which confession is the only direction left. I sat there and I said nothing and I let her answer and then I went home and I told myself it was just talk. It wasn't just talk. I know that now. You knew it then. She didn't argue. That was its own kind of answer. Tae-jin looked at his sister, this woman he had grown up beside, who had held his hand at their father's funeral, who had been his only genuine ally in the organization for the first 3 years of his leadership before their mother had slowly, deliberately, placed herself between them. He looked at her, and he felt something that was not forgiveness and was not its opposite. It was something more complicated than either. The specific grief of recognizing how long a person has been lost to you while still being present in the room. You're going to tell me everything, he said. Every meeting, every conversation, every message you were part of, saw, or heard about, every piece of the arrangement between Mi-suk and Do Hwan that you have any knowledge of. He moved to the door. Not now, tonight, when this is done. He paused with his hand on the door. And Seora, if you contact Alma before I give you permission, if you call her, message her, or communicate with her through any person or channel, I will treat you the same way I am about to treat everyone else involved in this. Seora nodded. She looked, for the first time, exactly like what she was, a woman who had made choices she couldn't unmake, sitting in a room where all the consequences of those choices had arrived simultaneously and were waiting, with complete patience, for her to fully understand them. Tae-jin left the room. In the corridor, Dong-soo fell into step beside him. They moved toward the elevator without speaking for the first 10 steps. Then Dong-soo said, quietly, Shin found something. Already. The surface layer moved fast. There's a financial transfer, 4 months ago, from a holding company that traces back to Mi-suk's personal accounts to a logistics firm in Incheon. He paused. The same firm that owned the vehicles used in last night's ambush. Tae-jin stopped walking. He stood in the corridor under the humming hospital lights, and he felt the shape of it fully for the first time. not as pieces, not as a sequence of revelations arriving one after another, but as a complete and finished architecture. Misuk had not panicked and made a desperate call to an enemy. She had been working with Do Hwan for at least 4 months. She had funded indirectly the attack on her own son's convoy. She had provided Nia's medical information as intelligence. She had positioned Nia as leverage in a negotiation she was conducting behind his back to restructure an arrangement of power that she felt had moved too far beyond her control. Everything else, the intercepted messages, the isolation campaign, the medical delays, had not been an act of personal cruelty toward Nia specifically, though it had been that too. It had been strategic positioning, Nia's weakened health, her isolation from Tae-jin, her diminished standing in the family foundation. All of it made her a cleaner piece of leverage. Easier to use, easier to move, easier to give away. His mother had been preparing Nia for transfer, the same way you prepare any asset before you liquidate it. He stood in the corridor and breathed through it, in, out. The way he had learned to breathe through things that would have destroyed other men, not by not feeling them, but by refusing to let the feeling arrive all at once, by metering it, by keeping enough of himself in the operational space to do what needed to be done before the full weight of the thing came down. "When does the night shift change?" he said. 2 hours. "I want her moved before then, not tomorrow night, tonight." He looked at Dongsu. "Not the scheduled route, not any route that has been discussed in this building in the last 48 hours. You and I plan it now, in this corridor, verbally, nothing written, nothing transmitted." He paused. "Who do we have that Byung-il has never met?" 3 men, maybe 4. "Use them. Only them." He started moving again. "And I want Do Hwan's location, not his office, not his known residences, where he actually is tonight." "Working on it." "Work faster." They reached the elevator. Dong-su hit the button. While they waited, Tae-jin's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was not one he recognized. Male, middle-aged, the measured cadence of someone accustomed to speaking carefully in situations where words carried consequences. "Mr. Kwan," the voice said, "my name isn't important. What is important is that I work in the prosecutor's financial crimes division, and I have been looking at the Kwan organization's port accounts for 11 months. A pause. "And I am calling you rather than serving a warrant, because what I found in the last 6 hours has changed the nature of the investigation significantly." The elevator arrived. Tae-jin did not get in. He pressed the close button and stood in the corridor as the doors shut on the empty car, and he said, "What did you find?" "Evidence that the financial irregularities I have been investigating were not generated by your organization," the voice said. "They were generated to implicate your organization. The origin point traces to a holding structure in Incheon." The voice paused. "The same structure that appears in 3 separate Do Hwan financial networks." Tae-jin said nothing. "There is also," the voice continued, more carefully now, "a second layer. One that connects the holding structure to an internal family account. The forensic accounting is still incomplete, but the preliminary picture suggests that someone inside the Kwan family has been systematically creating a financial record designed to make you personally liable for operations you did not authorize." Another pause. "Mr. Kwan, in approximately 72 hours, my division is prepared to move forward with warrants. The way the evidence is currently structured, those warrants will name you as the primary subject." The corridor was very quiet. "Unless," the voice said, and it was at that moment, standing under the fluorescent lights of the 4th-floor corridor, with his injured shoulder pulling against its stitches, and his sister sitting 30 feet away in a chair. She hadn't earned the right to sit in, and his wife behind a door. He was no longer certain he could fully protect, and 72 hours between him and a criminal indictment built from his own family's hands. That Kwan Tae-jin understood, with complete and devastating clarity, that the empire he had spent 15 years building had never been the target. He had been. And the architect of it was the woman who had taught him, before he was old enough to question her, what loyalty was supposed to look like. The voice on the phone was still waiting. Tae-jin stood in the corridor with the fluorescent light humming above him and his shoulder pulling against 8 stitches and 72 hours dissolving in real time, and he said, "What do you need?" "Everything," the prosecutor's man said. "Every account, Every operation, every name connected to the financial structure that was built to frame you. If you can deliver that, documented, verifiable, enough to redirect the investigation toward the actual architects, I can delay the warrants and reframe the evidentiary picture. A pause. But Mr. Kwan, 72 hours is not a negotiating position. It is a deadline. After that, my division moves regardless of what you provide. I'll need 48. You have 36. After that, I cannot hold my colleagues. The line went dead. Taijin lowered the phone. He stood absolutely still for 3 seconds. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but its opposite. The stillness of a man absorbing the full dimensional weight of a situation before deciding how to move inside it. Then he called Dong-Su. Change of timeline, he said. We move her in 90 minutes, and then I need every piece of financial documentation Shin has found, everything connected to the Inchin holding structure, on a secure drive in my hands within 2 hours. He started walking. And get me Seora. She's still in the room. Bring her to the 4th floor conference room, the one at the end of the east corridor. He pushed through the stairwell door. And Dong-Su, make sure she knows this is not optional. He went back to room 412 first. Nia was sitting up straighter than before. The oxygen cannula was still in place, but she'd pushed the blanket back, and she was looking at the door when he entered, which told him she'd heard the corridor activity and had been waiting. She studied his face the way she always studied his face, not looking for permission, looking for information, reading the specific geography of a man she had learned over 3 years to map accurately. You're moving me tonight, she said. 90 minutes. Where? Cardiac facility in Mapo. Different from the scheduled location, different route. I'll tell you the specifics when we're in the vehicle. He moved to the side of the bed. He looked at her directly. I need you to trust the next few hours without full information. I know that's not something I've earned cleanly. She looked back at him for a long moment. The monitor beeped its patient rhythm. I trusted you for 3 years without full information, she said. The difference is that this time you're asking. You're actually asking. She held his gaze. Don't waste it. I won't. He left her to pack the few things she had. In the East Corridor conference room, Seora was sitting at a long table under overhead lights that made everyone look worse than they were. She looked worse than she was. Her hair was loose, her eyes were stripped of their usual composure, and she had the compressed stillness of a person who has made a decision and is waiting for the moment to deliver it. Taijin sat across from her. He put his phone on the table. He said, Start talking. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping, except when he asked a question, and when Seora Kwan decided to stop managing what she revealed and simply told the truth in sequence, she was more precise and more thorough than he had expected, which told him she had been rehearsing this confession in some private chamber of herself for longer than anyone knew. She named dates. She named amounts. She named the specific conversations she had witnessed between Mi-suk and Do-hwan's intermediaries. 3 meetings over 5 months, the first of which she had attended believing, as she said, that it was a business negotiation. By the second meeting, she had understood what it was. She had not left. She had not told Taijin. She had told herself it would resolve itself, the way people tell themselves that about things they are afraid to look at directly. She told him about the financial architecture, or what she understood of it. The holding company in Incheon, the layered accounts, the transfers that had been structured to create a paper trail linking Taijin personally to operations that Do-hwan actually controlled. Mi-suk had provided the internal account numbers, the internal transaction codes, the family organization's ledger structure, things she had access to as the family's de facto financial overseer, things she had handed to Do-hwan's people like building materials. She was going to let you go to prison, Seora said. Her voice was flat with the flatness of someone who has stopped filtering. Or she was going to use the threat of it to manage you, to bring you back in line. She hadn't decided which. She looked at the table. Do-hwan was going to use the evidence to force you to surrender the port operations. Alma was going to use the same evidence as a leash, something to keep you from cutting her out entirely. She paused. I don't think she understood at the beginning that Do-hwan was planning to actually try to kill you. I think she believed it was all leverage, paper, pressure. She finally looked up. By the time she understood it wasn't, she was too far in. And she stayed in. Seora didn't answer, The answer was in the silence. Taejin looked at his sister across the conference table. He thought about the boy he had been in this woman's orbit, the older brother who had believed for most of his life that his family's cruelty was the world standard and that the correct response was to become harder than it. He thought about Nia telling him that Mi-suk was very good at making cruelty look like love, and he thought about how long it takes a person to learn that the love they were given early was not the only kind that existed, and how much gets lost in that education. "I'm going to need you to provide a formal statement," he said. "Everything you just told me, on record, with documentation where you have it." He stood. "If you do that, fully, without omission, I will tell the prosecutor's office that your cooperation was voluntary and comprehensive. What happens after that isn't in my control. But I will say what's true." Seora nodded, once, small, like a person accepting a sentence they know is fair. "And Seora," he picked up his phone. "Don't call Oma." "I know," she said quietly. "I'm done calling Oma." The next hour moved with the specific compressed velocity of situations that have been planned carefully and are now executing against a clock. Dong-soo assembled the transfer team. 4 men Do Hwan's network had never encountered, dressed in civilian clothes, using 2 vehicles borrowed from a restaurant supply company that had no connection to the Kwan organization. The route was discussed verbally, memorized, never written. Taejin walked it in his head 3 times while Shin's preliminary financial documents arrived on a secure drive that Taejin transferred to a second encrypted device and kept on his person. At 11:47, Nia was moved from room 412 on a standard transport gurney, through the service corridor, into a freight elevator, and out through the hospital's loading dock into a vehicle that looked like a catering delivery van. She was sitting up, not lying down, because she had refused the lying down option with a quiet firmness that the nurse assisting her had clearly decided not to argue with. She had a small bag on her lap. She was wearing a gray cardigan over her hospital gown, and she looked, sitting in the back of a catering van surrounded by 4 men with concealed weapons, like someone who had made a private decision at some point in the last hour and was now simply waiting to see how the rest of it played out. Taejin got in beside her. The doors closed. The van moved. For the first 3 minutes, neither of them spoke. The van navigated through back streets, away from the hospital's main approaches, through a district of closed restaurants and shuttered markets, where the only light came from convenience stores and the occasional security lamp above a parking structure. Taejin watched the side mirror. His hand was near his side. His shoulder pulled with every significant movement, and he had stopped registering it the way you stop registering a particular sound when you've been hearing it long enough. "You're taking a breath," Nia said quietly. "I'm watching the mirror." "You're doing both." He glanced at her. She was looking at the window, her profile still and composed, the cardigan pulled close. "How are you feeling?" he said, which was the first time in this entire night that he had asked her that directly. "Like someone who had a cardiac event 12 hours ago and is currently in a catering van." She paused. "I've been worse." "When?" She thought about it. "The Chuseok dinner, 2 years ago. The one where your mother spent 45 minutes explaining to 3 guests why I didn't understand Korean family values." She looked at him. "That was worse." He held her gaze. "I wasn't listening that night." "No, you were talking to your uncle about fishing rights." "I remember." "I know you do." She turned back to the window. "That's new. The remembering out loud." He didn't have a response to that. He turned back to the mirror. The street behind them was clear. A motorbike 2 blocks back had turned off. The second vehicle, carrying Dong-soo and 2 of the men, was 2 intersections behind, running parallel. Everything was clean. Everything was moving correctly, which was precisely when Taejin's phone buzzed with a message from Dong-soo that said simply, "Blue sedan. 3 cars back. Plates matched Dohwan's pool." His jaw tightened. He typed, "How long?" The response came in 4 seconds, since the loading dock. They had picked up a tail from inside the hospital grounds, which meant someone had seen the van loading. Not a team, not a coordinated surveillance operation, but one person with a phone and Do Hwan's number who had been watching the loading dock and had made a call the moment the gurney came through the door. Someone who had still been inside the building after Mi-suk's team withdrew. Someone small enough and unremarkable enough to remain unnoticed during the lockdown. The infrastructure of betrayal, Tae-jin thought, was never one large thing. It was always several small things that nobody had thought to look at. He leaned forward to the driver. Change the route. Yongsan District through the market corridor. Slower streets. He looked at the second vehicle's position on his phone. Tell Dong-soo to close the gap on the blue sedan. Not to stop it, just close it. The driver nodded and turned without speaking. The van moved into a narrower district. Older buildings, tighter streets. The kind of Seoul that existed underneath the glass and steel surface. Street vendors' metal shutters were rolled down for the night. A few pedestrians. A dog moving along a wall. The blue sedan followed at 3 car lengths, steady, not attempting to close. It was tracking, not intercepting, which meant it was reporting, which meant somewhere someone was receiving the location data and deciding when to move. Tae-jin's phone rang. Do Hwan's number. Not a number Do Hwan would actually use, but one of his secondaries, one that Tae-jin had in his files from an intercepted call 18 months ago. He answered. You're running, Do Hwan said. His voice was lower than Tae-jin remembered from their last direct communication 2 years prior. More settled. The voice of a man who believed the ground beneath him was solid. That's not something I expected from you. I'm relocating a patient, Tae-jin said, in a catering van. At midnight. A sound that might have been a short exhale of amusement. You found the tail. 20 seconds after you put it on us. Good. I wanted you to know it was there. I wanted you to know we've been watching since the loading dock. Since before that, actually. Since your man Dong-soo started making calls about alternative routes this afternoon. A pause. You've been moving fast tonight, Tae-jin, but we've been moving since yesterday. What do you want? What I've always wanted. The ports, the processing contracts, the 3 council seats your family controls in the Western District. Do Hwan's voice was entirely reasonable. The voice of a man stating terms he considers fair. Give me those things and your wife reaches her hospital safely, and the financial evidence currently sitting with the prosecutor's office becomes lost paperwork. Everyone moves forward. And my mother. A brief pause. Your mother and I have had a productive relationship, but she's outlived her usefulness as an intermediary. What happens to her is a family matter. I have no interest in it. The van navigated a tight corner. The blue sedan followed. Tae-jin could see it clearly in the side mirror now. A standard commercial sedan, nothing identifiable, exactly the kind of vehicle that disappeared in urban traffic. He looked at the distance, looked at the street layout on his phone, thought about Dong-soo's position. The ports, Tae-jin said, still on the call, took 11 years to build. The processing contracts involved 17 separate negotiations across 3 governments. The council seats represent relationships that predate my leadership by 15 years. He kept his voice conversational. Easy. You want me to hand all of that over from the back of a catering van? I want you to agree to the terms, Do Hwan said. The specifics transfer over the next 30 days, orderly, professional. Another pause. This doesn't need to be ugly, Tae-jin. Your mother made it ugly. I prefer clean arrangements. She gave you my convoy route, Tae-jin said. She did. She gave you Nia's transfer information. Also, yes. She financed the vehicles used in the ambush. A brief silence. That's a strong characterization of a financial relationship that was, did she know you intended to kill me? The silence this time was longer, more considered. Do Hwan, to his credit, was not a man who lied clumsily. She knew the convoy would be stopped, he said. What she told herself about what stopped meant. That's a question for her conscience, not mine. Tae-jin said nothing for a moment. The van turned again. The blue sedan turned with it. 2 streets ahead, if the layout matched his phone, there was an intersection where the cross street was wide enough for Dong-soo's vehicle to come alongside. I'll consider your terms, Tae-jin said. You have until we reach whatever destination you're running toward. That should be enough time. He ended the call and immediately texted Dong-soo 2 words, next intersection. What happened at the next intersection took 11 seconds and was not violent, which was the part that Do Hwan had not anticipated. Dong-soo's vehicle came from the cross street and slid to a stop directly beside the blue sedan, blocking its path through the intersection without contact. The blue sedan braked. The driver made a decision in real time, reverse or wait. and chose to wait, which was the wrong choice, because waiting meant Dong-su's men were out of the vehicle and standing at both front doors in under 4 seconds, and the blue sedan's driver and passenger were looking at two men who were not pointing weapons at them, but were standing with the specific body language of men who owned the space and would not be moved from it. The van continued through the intersection without slowing. Taijin watched the sedan disappear from the mirror. Beside him, Nia let out a slow breath she'd been holding since the call ended. She had heard everything. She hadn't spoken. She had sat with her small bag in her lap and her back straight against the van wall, and she had listened to a man negotiate her safety over the phone with the man who'd spent months engineering her vulnerability, and she had not made a sound. "You didn't agree to anything," she said. "No." "He's going to know that in about 4 minutes. 3, Taijin said. "Dong-su can't hold the intersection longer than 3. Then what? Then Do Hwan stops waiting for a clean arrangement and starts moving to an ugly one." He looked at the road ahead, "which is what I need him to do." She looked at him. "You want him to move?" "I need him to move before I can document it, before I can give the prosecutor's office evidence of an active operation rather than a historical financial structure." He glanced at her. "Do Hwan sitting on leverage is untouchable. Do Hwan deploying it is a criminal act in progress." Nia was quiet for a moment. The van moved through the narrow streets. "You're using me as bait," she said. Not with anger. With the precise, clear voice of someone naming a thing accurately before deciding how they feel about it. "I'm using the situation," he said. "You were already in it. I'm not creating the danger. I know." Her voice was quieter now. "I know the difference. I'm not accusing you." She looked at the window. "I just need to know that you know you're doing it, that you're not telling yourself a cleaner version of this." He was silent for a moment. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said, "and I know what it costs." "Okay," she said. Just that. The cardiac facility in Mapo appeared at the end of a quiet residential approach, a mid-sized private building set back from the road behind a low wall. Its entrance lit with the particular warm institutional light of places that specialize in the long, slow work of keeping people alive. The van pulled through the vehicle entrance as arranged, and Nia was transferred inside with the swift, practiced efficiency of a facility that had been called ahead and briefed and asked not to ask questions they didn't need answered. Taijin stood in the receiving area and watched her go through the inner doors, and then he turned and looked at Dong-su, who had arrived 40 seconds behind them. "The sedan," he said. "Disabled. The men are in the back of a locked vehicle in a parking structure on Mapo Daero. They have phones, but no signal." Dong-su paused. "Do Hwan knows we've gone dark. His next move. He'll activate whatever secondary team he has positioned in this district." Dong-su looked at him steadily. "We don't have the manpower to cover this building the way we covered the hospital. We're running thin." "I know." Taijin looked at the facility entrance, thought about the 36-hour window the prosecutor had given him, thought about the financial documents on the drive in his pocket, thought about Seora in the hospital conference room, waiting. How much of Shin's documentation is usable in its current form? Shin says about 60%. The rest needs verification against the actual ledger records, which are in the Kwan family office on the 17th floor of the Jongno building, which Misuk has access to. Which she is likely accessing right now, Dong-su said. If she understands what we're building, she'll be pulling or destroying records. Taijin made the decision in the time it took to draw one breath. "We go to Jongno. Now. Now, you take 3 men to the building. I meet you there in 20 minutes. He looked at the facility doors. 2 men stay here. Inside, not outside. 1 in the lobby, 1 on her floor. And you. I'm going to make a call first." Dong-su moved. Taijin stepped to the far corner of the receiving area, away from the desk staff, and dialed a number he had been given 2 hours ago by a voice he didn't know. The prosecutor's man answered on the second ring. "The financial structure you found," Taijin said. "The Incheon Holding Company. Can you trace the authorization signatures on the transfer documents?" "We're working on it." "The signatures will match a power of attorney that was granted to Misuk Kwan 18 months ago when I was out of the country for 6 weeks. She used it to conduct legitimate business in my name. She continued using the authorization after it technically expired." He paused. "I didn't know she was still using it. That's in the organizational records. The date of expiry, the date of the transfers. The gap between them is provable. A brief silence on the line. That moves the evidentiary picture significantly. There's also a physical ledger at the family office in the Jongno building. The real accounts, not the structured ones. The actual record of what moved when and on whose authorization. He paused. I'm going to retrieve it. Mr. Kwan, if your office wants to send someone, they're welcome to meet me there. He checked the time. In 18 minutes. He hung up, walked back to the entrance, stepped out into the night air, which had finally stopped raining, the city spread out wet and glistening under its own light. Seoul in the small hours with its particular quality of energy. Not quiet, never quiet, but shifted into a different register, a lower frequency, the sound of a city that doesn't sleep but does, occasionally, breathe. His phone rang. Unknown number. Not the prosecutor's man, a different unknown. He answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then his mother's voice. Not calibrated this time, not warm, not managed, not any version of the instrument she'd been playing for 40 years. Just her voice, underneath everything she'd built on top of it, which was something he hadn't heard since he was a child and hadn't known he'd missed until this moment. I know you're going to the office, she said. He said nothing. I know what you're building. I know who you called. A long pause. I'm already there, Taejin. I've been there for the last hour. The air outside the facility was cool against his face. A car passed on the street beyond the gate. Somewhere behind the clouds, the city's light reflected back onto itself, orange and diffuse, the sky above Seoul always brighter than it should be. Then I'll see you there, he said. He got into the car. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. Taejin said, Jongno, 17th floor. Don't stop for anything. The car moved. The wet streets slid past the windows. In the distance, the Hongno building was visible, a tower among towers, its windows mostly dark at this hour except for the upper floors, where a single bank of lights burned against the night sky like something waiting. On the 17th floor, behind the glass doors of the Kwan family office, Tae-jin's phone buzzed one more time. Dong-soo. 3 words that arrived as the car accelerated onto the main road toward the building. She's not alone. He stared at the message. Read it twice. Typed back, How many? The response arrived in 4 seconds, and when he read it, his hand tightened on the phone with a force that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the specific bone-level response of a man who has just understood that the thing he thought was a confrontation was actually a trap, and that he has been moving toward it with complete and deliberate speed for the last 20 minutes. The number Dong-soo sent was not the number of his mother's staff. It was the number of Do Hwan's men. The number on Dong-soo's message was 9. 9 of Do Hwan's men on the 17th floor of the Jongno building, alongside whatever staff Mi-suk had brought, in the office that held the one physical record that could either save Tae-jin or finish him. 9 men who had been positioned there, not reactively, not in response to anything Tae-jin had done tonight, but pre-positioned, which meant Do Hwan had known about the ledger before Tae-jin mentioned it to the prosecutor's man, which meant the prosecutor's man had made a call he wasn't supposed to make, which meant the 36-hour window was not a lifeline. It was a leash. Tae-jin sat in the back of the moving car and held that understanding in his hands, and turned it over and looked at every face of it. The prosecutor's division had been investigating the Kwan organization for 11 months. Do Hwan's financial structure was embedded in that investigation. The man who had called Tae-jin tonight was not offering a way out of the investigation. He was offering a controlled collapse, a version of events in which Tae-jin handed over everything useful and then stepped into a box that Do Hwan and the prosecutor's office had built together. A box shaped exactly like cooperation. He had 40 seconds before the car reached the Jongno building. He typed to Dong-soo, How many of ours on site? 3 came back, plus me. He typed, Don't go in. Hold the perimeter. Let them know we're coming, but don't commit. Then he called the one number he had not yet used tonight. A man named Assemblyman Choi, who sat on the Parliamentary Oversight Committee for Financial Crimes, who had a relationship with the Kwan organization that predated Tae-jin's leadership, and who had, on 2 separate occasions over the last decade, asked for and received Tae-jin's quiet assistance with problems that could not be solved through official channels. The relationship had never been transactional in the explicit sense. It existed in the register of understood obligation, the kind of debt that powerful men carry between them without ever writing it down. Choi answered on the 4th ring, which meant he'd been asleep, which meant Tai Jin had woken him, which meant this was the full weight of what he was about to ask. I need someone in the prosecutor's financial crimes division looked at, Tai Jin said without preamble. Tonight. Someone who has been sharing investigation intelligence with a private party. He gave Choi the name the prosecutor's man had eventually provided during their conversation. A small, incidental detail that Tai Jin had filed away and was now retrieving. I also need the Oversight Committee aware that a criminal operation is actively in progress at the Kwan family offices in Jongno. Tonight. Right now. He paused. I'm going to be providing documentation to the committee directly, not to the Financial Crimes Division. Choi was quiet for a moment, the silence of a man calculating what this costs him and what refusing costs him. This is a significant ask, Tai Jin. I know what it is. What you're describing, if it's accurate, implicates a sitting prosecutor's office employee in active collusion with— It's accurate, Tai Jin said. An assemblyman. When this is over, my organization's records go to the committee in full. Everything. I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking for a witness. Another silence, longer. Then Choi said, I'll make calls, and ended the line. The car stopped in front of the Jongno building. Tai Jin got out. The building's lobby was lit and staffed by a night security guard who looked up from his desk with the expression of someone who has seen a great many things in a great many late nights and has developed the professional capacity to register them without reacting. He saw Tai Jin. He saw the set of his face and the deliberateness of his movement and the two men who had gotten out of a second car behind him, and he looked back down at his desk. Tai Jin passed the security desk and went to the elevator. Dong-soo was waiting near the fire door to the stairwell. His face carried the controlled tension of a man running numbers in his head that aren't adding up favorably. 9 confirmed, he said quietly, plus 2 of Mi Sook's personal staff. Do Hwan isn't there himself. This is a team, not a command presence. They're here for the ledger. They don't have it yet. How do you know? Because if they had it, Do Hwan would have called me already. Tai Jin looked at the elevator indicator. He wants me to know he has it. That's the whole point. The ledger isn't valuable to him as evidence. It's valuable as a thing he can hold over me. He looked at Dong-soo, which means it's still in the office, which means Mi Sook hasn't given it to them yet. Why would she hold it back? Because it's the last thing she has, Tai Jin said. She gave Do Hwan everything else, the convoy route, the transfer information, the financial architecture, my location tonight. The ledger is the last card in her hand. She'll give it to him when she has something to trade for it. He pressed the elevator button, which means right now, on the 17th floor, my mother and Do Hwan's team are in the same room, and they are not, at this precise moment, on the same side. Dong-soo looked at him steadily. You're going up there. Yes. With what? Tai Jin reached into his coat and produced the encrypted drive. He held it for a moment, then put it back. With everything Shin found, and with the fact that Do Hwan's men are committing a documented criminal act in a building covered by security cameras, in a city where a parliamentary oversight committee has been awake for the last 4 minutes making phone calls. He met Dong-soo's eyes. And with the fact that my mother, whatever else she is, has never in her life made a decision she couldn't reverse. And she's about to realize that handing that ledger to Do Hwan is the one she can't take back. The elevator arrived. Tai Jin stepped in. Dong-soo stepped in beside him. You could have just told me the plan, Dong-soo said. I'm still building it, Tai Jin said, and the doors closed. The 17th floor was lit fully. Every overhead panel burning, the office visible through its glass facade from the moment the elevator opened, the way offices look when they've been occupied suddenly and without preparation for comfort. Tai Jin could see through the glass before the elevator doors had finished opening. He could see the shapes of men positioned near the file corridor and the main conference room and the entrance to the records vault at the building's core. He could also see his mother. Mi Sook was standing at the center of the main floor, in front of the large desk that had been her husband's, and then briefly hers, and then Tai Jin's, and she was standing very straight with her coat still buttoned and her hands at her sides. And she was talking to a man Tai Jin didn't recognize, broad, contained, the body language of Do Hwan's professional tier, and the conversation they were having was clearly not going well for either of them, though the reasons were different. Tai Jin walked through the glass doors. The room shifted. The men near the file corridor moved. Not aggressively, not yet, but with the recalibration of people whose plan has just acquired a new variable. The man talking to Misuk turned. Misuk turned, and in the space of the 2 seconds it took for everyone in the room to absorb the fact of Taijin's presence, the dynamic that had existed for the last hour reconfigured itself entirely. "You came," Misuk said. Her voice was not relieved, not quite, but something adjacent to it, which told him everything he needed to know about what the last hour had looked like for her. "Where's the ledger?" Taijin said. "Mr. Quan." The broad man stepped forward. His voice had the flat professionalism of someone who has been in enough rooms like this to have developed a script for it. "We're here on behalf of a business arrangement with your family that predates. You're here because Do Huan sent you to retrieve a document that proves his organization used my family's financial infrastructure to run operations that he intends to attribute to me." Taijin's voice was conversational, even. "You're also currently being recorded by 14 building security cameras, and in approximately 20 minutes, representatives of the Parliamentary Oversight Committee will be in this building." He paused. "So the question for you is whether you want to be here when they arrive." The man's expression didn't change, but his weight shifted slightly, the kind of shift that happens when a calculation is being revised. "The ledger," Taijin said again, not to the man this time, to Misuk. His mother looked at him. And here, in this moment, in this room, under the full overhead light with nothing left to manage, she looked for the first time in Taijin's memory like a woman who was tired. Not defeated, not broken, not performing exhaustion for effect. Just tired. The way people look when they have been running a very long race and have finally come to understand that the finish line was not where they were told it was. "I didn't give it to them," she said. "I know. I was going to." She held his gaze. "I want you to know that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I changed my mind for noble reasons." Her voice was flat and precise. "I changed my mind because Do Huan's man told me 40 minutes ago that the arrangement had been modified, that my role going forward was administrative." She paused. He used that word. Administrative. Taijin said nothing. 40 years, she said. "I built 40 years of this organization from the inside. I managed your father's worst instincts and covered his worst decisions and held this family together through 3 restructurings and 2 investigations and a succession that could have collapsed everything." Her voice didn't rise. It stayed level, which was somehow worse than if it had broken. "And I was told my role going forward was administrative. So you held the ledger." "I held the ledger. And now." She reached into the inner pocket of her coat and produced a flat, cloth-bound book. Old, its spine reinforced with tape, the kind of physical record that existed before digital infrastructure became standard and had been maintained because certain things were too important to trust to servers. She held it for a moment. Then she held it out toward Taijin. He crossed the room and took it from her hand. The broad man took a step forward. One of Dong Su's men moved to intercept him, and the room went very still in the specific way of situations that are one decision away from becoming violent, everyone present running the same calculation simultaneously and arriving for the moment at the same result. "Wait." "Call Do Huan," Taijin said to the broad man. "Tell him the ledger is in my possession. Tell him the parliamentary committee is 20 minutes away. Tell him the decision he needs to make is whether he wants to make it before or after they arrive." He tucked the ledger inside his coat. "And tell him that whatever deal he had with my mother is over, and that the deal he can have with me involves full cooperation with the committee and the surrender of every financial structure that was built using Quan accounts." He paused. "That's the only arrangement I'm offering. He has until the committee walks through that door." The broad man looked at him for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and walked toward the window and made a call. Taijin turned to his mother. They stood facing each other in the middle of the office that had shaped both of their lives, and there was no version of what needed to be said that was going to be clean or sufficient or enough. Taijin understood that. He had understood it since the hospital corridor, since the curtain, since the moment he had heard her voice saying the things she'd said to a woman who was unconscious and couldn't defend herself. He understood that there were things between them now that would not be resolved in this room or any room, that would instead become part of the permanent landscape of what they were to each other, changed irrevocably into something neither of them had chosen and both of them had built. "Nia," he said. One word. Misuk's jaw tightened. Something moved through her face, not remorse exactly, but the closest thing to it he had ever seen there. The specific expression of a person who has arrived at an understanding too late and knows, with complete clarity, that the lateness is its own kind of verdict. "I knew what I was doing," she said quietly. "I want you to know that I knew. I'm not going to tell you I didn't understand the consequences of leaving her untreated. I understood them. I made a calculation." She paused. "I was wrong." "You were wrong," he said. "Yes." "She almost died." "Yes." "And you knew the night it happened, at the banquet, when she collapsed." He kept his eyes on her. "You knew exactly what you'd done." Misuk didn't look away. Whatever she was not, in this moment, a woman who looked away from things. "Yes," she said again. The room was quiet for a moment. Dong-Su was near the door. The broad man was still at the window, still on his call. The other men in the room had drifted into a kind of suspended neutrality, waiting for the shape of things to resolve. "I'm going to give the committee everything," Tae-jin said. "The accounts, the operations, the ledger, and Shin's documentation. I'm going to give them your name and Do Hwan's name and every connection between them. And then I'm going to give them mine." He paused. "Whatever they do with it, I'll accept." Misuk looked at him with something he had no name for. "You'll lose everything." "I've already lost it." He said it without drama, without performance, without the weight of a man making a grand gesture. He said it the way you say something that is simply, factually true. "The thing I built, the way it worked, what it required from the people inside it, it's not something I can go back to. Not after what I know." He looked at her steadily. "I won't." "Because of her. Because of what I heard behind a curtain," he said. "Because of what that told me about who I had become. Who I had allowed to exist in the name of what I was building." He paused. "She's part of it. She's not all of it." Misuk was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost the last of its architecture. It was just a voice, an older woman's voice, in an office at night, saying something she had not said in a very long time. "I loved you," she said. "Everything I did was inside that. I know you don't believe that right now." "I believe it," he said. "That's what makes it so hard." The elevator opened behind them, and 3 men in civilian clothes with parliamentary identification badges stepped onto the floor, followed by 2 uniformed officers, and slightly behind them, a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he hadn't slept since the previous morning and had the specific energy of someone who had been making phone calls for the last 20 minutes and had found them more productive than expected. Do Hwan's team, to their credit, did not resist. The broad man at the window had ended his call and was standing with his hands visible and his phone on the windowsill, which told Tae-jin that whatever Do Hwan had decided in the last 15 minutes, he had decided that the evening was over. Mi-suk-kwon was taken into custody at 2:14 in the morning in the office her husband had built and she had run, and her son had inherited and was now, tonight, helping to dismantle. She walked to the elevator under her own power, her coat still buttoned, her back straight, with the specific dignity of a woman who had always understood that how you moved through a room was the last thing anyone could take from you. She did not look back. Tae-jin watched her go and felt the particular grief of things that are finished. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the slower, heavier kind that comes from watching something end that you had believed, despite all evidence, might find a way to survive. Then he went downstairs, got in a car, and went back to Nia. She was awake when he arrived at the Mapo facility. He had not called ahead. He wasn't sure until he was in the car moving through the pre-dawn streets, whether he would come directly here or go somewhere else first. But there was nowhere else. There had not been anywhere else since the moment this night started. She was sitting up in bed in the new room, which was smaller than the hospital room, and quieter, with a window that looked out onto a side street where a single street lamp cast a small, specific circle of light on the wet pavement below. She was reading something on a tablet. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. He looked at her from the threshold. She looked at him from the bed. He was still in the coat. He had been in the same clothes for 22 hours. He had 8 stitches in his shoulder and a bruise developing along his left ribs that he hadn't found time to acknowledge, and the particular quality of exhaustion that lives on the other side of extended adrenaline, the kind that settles into the bones and announces that it will be staying for a while. Come in, she said. You look terrible. He came in. He sat down in the chair beside her bed. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he looked at the floor for a moment, and then he looked up at her. It's done, he said. She looked at his face and read it the way she had always read it, carefully, completely, without filling in the parts she couldn't see with what she hoped was there. All of it. Enough of it. He paused. The committee has the ledger and Shin's documentation. Do Hwan's team is in custody. My mother... He stopped. The sentence had an ending, but it needed a moment. She's been arrested. Nia was quiet. Seora cooperated fully, he continued. She'll be processed separately. Her cooperation is documented. He looked at his hands, and I gave the committee everything connected to my own organization's operations. The accounts, the contracts, the names. He paused. All of it. She absorbed this. Which means you. Which means me. He met her eyes. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. The street lamp outside made a small yellow square on the floor between them. The facility was completely quiet at this hour, the particular quiet of a place where people are sleeping the deep, medicated sleep of hearts being carefully monitored. You didn't have to do that, she said. Give them your own records. You could have given them enough to redirect the investigation and kept enough back to... I know, he said. So why? He thought about it. Not about the answer, which he knew, but about how to say it in a way that was true without being more than true. Because every version where I kept something back was a version where I was still that, he said. Still the person who manages what people know, who decides what's safe for other people to see. He looked at her. I've been doing that for 15 years. I did it to everyone around me. I did it to you. He paused. I don't want to do it anymore. Nia looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. You understand what comes next, she said. An investigation. Prosecution, possibly. The organization is gone. The money, a lot of it, is gone. Everything you built. Yes. You're not performing this. You actually understand it. Yes. She was quiet again. Outside, a car passed on the street below, and the headlights moved across the window and were gone. She put the tablet down on the blanket beside her. She looked at her own hands for a moment, the way people look at their hands when they are trying to find language for something that doesn't have a clean shape. When I was lying on the floor of that banquet hall, she said quietly, when everything went wrong and the room started to tilt, do you know what I thought about? She didn't wait for him to answer. I thought about the drive we took up the coast last spring, the one where we didn't talk for 2 hours, and then you stopped at that place that sold fish off a truck, and you ate standing up in the parking lot, and you got sauce on your coat, and you were so annoyed. She smiled slightly, small and real. I thought about that. He looked at her. I didn't think about the family, she said. I didn't think about the foundation, or the marriage, or any of the things that had been making me miserable for 8 months. I thought about a parking lot and bad fish and you being annoyed about your coat. She paused. I thought, I'm not done with this person. Whatever else is true, I'm not done. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried at his father's funeral or at any of the other moments in his life when other men might have. But something in his face shifted right now, some internal structure that had been holding weight for a very long time, and whatever it did, it was visible, and Nia saw it and did not look away from it. I'm not done either, he said. I know. She reached out her hand. He took it. Her fingers were warm and her grip was steady, and it was such an ordinary thing, 2 people holding hands in a hospital room, and it was the most real thing that had happened to him in a very long time. But we're building something different, she said. If we build anything, something that I'm actually part of, that I can actually see. Yes. Not because you're afraid of losing me. No, he said, because you're worth building with. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and leaned her head back against the pillow, and kept his hand. They stayed like that for a while. The street lamp made its small circle outside. The monitor beeped its patient rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse walked past on quiet shoes. The weeks that followed were not gentle. They were the kind of weeks that stripped things down to their actual material, that show you what a person is made of not by how they perform under observation, but by how they move through days that offer no audience and no reward. The investigation was thorough and long and occasionally brutal in its specificity. Tae-jin answered every question asked of him in every deposition and every committee hearing without evasion, without the managed half-truths of a man trying to preserve a portion of what he'd built. He gave them the complete picture. He knew, from the first day, that this was the only version of this he could live inside. Do Hwan's organization collapsed with a speed that surprised even the investigators. A structure that had appeared formidable turning out, once the financial documentation was properly examined, to have been load-bearing on the Kwan accounts for far longer than anyone had understood. Without that support, it fell in sections, each section taking other connected networks with it, a cascade that eventually reached 3 levels of political connection and resulted in 7 additional arrests over the following 2 months. Misuk's trial was not short. She was defended by a team that was very good and worked very hard and could not overcome the weight of what Seora had provided, combined with the physical ledger and the phone records, and the security footage from the hospital corridor outside room 412. She was convicted of conspiracy, criminal endangerment, and financial fraud. Her sentence was longer than her lawyers had projected, and shorter than what Tae-jin had privately thought was just. He attended one day of the trial. He sat in the back of the courtroom, and he watched his mother speak, and he listened to her voice, and he felt the full, unmanageable complexity of what she was to him, the damage she had done, and the things she had genuinely built, and the enormous, painful, irreducible fact that both of those things lived in the same person. He did not speak to her during the trial. He wrote her a letter 3 months after sentencing. He did not keep a copy. Seora's cooperation earned her a suspended sentence and a period of supervised service. She did not return to the family organization. There was nothing to return to. She found, in the months that followed, a narrow and unglamorous path, working with a legal aid organization that focused on women leaving coercive family situations. She was not good at it immediately. She got better slowly. She and Tae-jin spoke by phone twice in the first year. Brief, careful conversations that were not yet what they might eventually become, and were more than they had been before. Nia's surgery was scheduled 6 weeks after that night and performed by a team at a university hospital that had no connection to anything the Kwan organization had ever touched. She came out of it cleanly as a thing involving a human heart can be clean, which is to say there were 2 weeks of significant difficulty followed by a long recovery that required patience she had in reserve she hadn't known she'd built. She ran the foundation from a laptop during the months of recovery, rebuilt its board with people she had chosen without consulting anyone's approval, and renamed it. The new name was her own, the name she had carried before the marriage, attached now to work that was entirely hers. Tae-jin received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. He served it without the privileges that money arranges for powerful men because he had declined to arrange them. The facility was ordinary, the days were long and without event. He read. He wrote letters. He thought about the things he had built and the things he had allowed and the specific mechanics of how a person who believes themselves to be protecting something can spend years destroying it without ever making a single dramatic decision. Just a long series of small ones, each individually justifiable, each adding a layer to a structure that was, from the outside, something other than what it claimed. He thought about Naya eating alone at formal dinners. He thought about the March dinner. He thought about a curtain. On the morning of his release, he walked out carrying a single cardboard box that held the accumulated possessions of the time he'd served. 3 books, a photograph, a small ceramic cup Nia had sent him through the facility's mail system in his 3rd month with no note attached. He stood outside the facility entrance in the cold morning light, with the box under his arm, and looked at the road. Across the road, Nia was leaning against a car. She was wearing a dark coat and her hair was pulled back, and she looked like herself, which meant she looked like the most recognizable thing in his world. She was watching him with those clear, direct eyes, and she was not smiling yet, which was honest, because there was nothing about this moment that was simple enough to smile at immediately. He crossed the road. They stood facing each other with the cardboard box between them and the cold air in the morning. "You look better than the last time I saw you in person," she said. "Lower bar." "Somewhat." She looked at him carefully. "How are you?" Honest answer? "Always." "I don't know yet," he said. "I think I need a few days before I can answer that accurately. She nodded. That's the first time you've ever said you don't know something without following it with an answer anyway. He thought about it. It might be. She opened the car door. He put the box in the back. They got in. She drove. He watched Seoul move past the windows, the city he had once owned in the way that certain men own certain things, through fear and money and the accumulated weight of reputation, and which now simply existed around him the way cities exist around everyone. Indifferent, continuous, full of people making their ordinary choices in their ordinary lives. Where are we going? He said. I found a place on the coast, she said. About 2 hours south. Small. Needs work. She kept her eyes on the road. I thought we could look at it. For the center. For the center, yes. And she paused. A small pause, considered. And for us. If that's something we're still doing. He looked at her profile. The set of her jaw, the way she held the wheel, the quality of patience in her that had survived everything it had been asked to survive. Is it something you want? He said. I wouldn't be driving, she said. He looked back at the road ahead. Outside, the city was beginning to thin into its edges, the dense towers giving way to lower buildings and then to the transitional spaces where the urban became something else, the landscape opening up degrees at a time. He had driven this road before, years ago, in cars that cost more than most people's apartments, surrounded by men whose job was to ensure that nothing unexpected reached him. He drove it now in a used sedan with a woman who had made the choice, clear-eyed, uncoerced, knowing the full weight of what it cost, to keep driving. Thank you, he said. For what specifically? For not making it easy, he said. For not letting me replace one version of silence with another. She glanced at him. Something in her face moved. Not quite a smile, not quite sadness, something that lived in the particular territory between the two where most of the important things in a life actually happen. Don't thank me yet, she said. The place needs a lot of work. He almost smiled. I have time. You do, she said. We both do. The road opened up ahead of them. The sky was pale and wide, and the sea was still hours away, but already, in some quality of the light, present. They drove south through the ordinary morning of an ordinary day, carrying what they had lost and what they had built from the losing of it, and neither of them needed to name any of it out loud, because the drive itself was the naming, the fact of moving forward, together, in the direction of the unfinished thing that was still, despite everything, worth finishing. 2 hours later, Tae-jin stood on a narrow porch overlooking a quiet stretch of coastline. The building behind him was small and salt-weathered and full of potential that would require real work to reach. The sea moved below in long, easy swells. The air smelled like cold water and distance. Nia came and stood beside him. They looked at the water. Well, she said. Well, he said. She looked at the building, then at the water, then at him. I'll do the foundation work if you fix the roof. I don't know how to fix a roof. Then you'll learn, she said simply, and went back inside. He stood on the porch a moment longer. The sea moved the way it always moved, without urgency, without agenda, without any awareness of the specific human weight of the man watching it. The curtain he had once stood behind in a darkened hospital room in a city 2 hours north had shown him everything. Not what he wanted to see, what was actually there. He had spent 15 years building walls. A curtain had been enough to bring him through. He turned. He went inside. He closed the door behind him and left it unlocked, the way you leave a door when you are not afraid of what comes next. And somewhere in the quiet of the coastal morning, the sound of two people beginning the ordinary, difficult, necessary work of building something that actually deserved to last moved out through the walls and into the salt air and dissolved gently into the sound of the sea.